For a long time, I've considered an idea that I find captivating. Regardless of the band that you investigate, any band which survives long enough travels through a phenomenon I call the first five. That is, the first 5 albums of any band's career will give you a perfect encapsulation of their journey as artists, the things that influenced why these musical decisions were made, and why anything that comes after tends to neither be original nor truly groundbreaking by way of comparison to the first 5. This concept is broken down into 5 parts. I have labeled them as the beginning, the climb, the peak, the change, and the new age. The separation of the 5 individual steps helps differentiate what has been or will be done by the band in shorter summation as an idea, while giving space to describe what each phrase encapsulates. I originally struck upon this idea while listening to the mighty Metallica and realized how much diversity, growth, change, and eventual stagnation occurred within a short but fruitful 10-year period. This all came from a band that would end up influencing generations of musicians and fans alike to appreciate the music they created and the ideals they stood for. It is no small feat that once every 2 years, the rapid change and growth of one band could lead to such an interesting destination. The beginning. Now, while this idea is fascinating in theory, the road to the end of the first 5 is fraught with peril and uncertainty. It is in my opinion that none more so express this than Metallica's musical trajectory over the course of their first 5 releases. While starting life as a band in 1981, Metallica's first release was the seminal 1983 classic Kill 'Em All. The original title of this album was intended to be Metal Up Your Ass, with an equally appropriate image to represent the hard-hitting, penetrative sound of the band. However, Metallica would receive pressure from the label to change the title of the album, and thus they arrived at the bloody, hammer-laden Kill 'Em All, attempting to maintain the same passionate and destructive ideas that birthed the band in the first place, while attempting to not compromise the brutality that they so enjoyed. With speedy classics like Motor Breath, Whiplash, and Metal Militia, Metallica helped loudly proclaim and proudly turn up the volume on the thrash metal genre that they would go on to help popularize at a time when heavy metal was undergoing a transition into a new age of speed, precision, and deafening volumes. Yet within their first album, we would already have inklings of where the band would progress to, with lengthy anthemic songs like Seek and Destroy and the Four Horsemen both clocking in at nearly and just past 7 minutes in length. A penchant for lengthy, protracted riffs, soloing, and musicality, really only seen in the progressive rock genre, would provide a potential insight into where Metallica might be heading in one short year's time. The Climb. In just 1 year and 2 days, Metallica would release their second album, Ride the Lightning, which saw an increase in the quality of every aspect of the band. Songwriting, musical composition, and production had all improved. It is clear that as we move forward, that the band will only continue to evolve the sounds they came from into something greater, with fully half of the album's 8 songs clocking in at over 6 minutes. Instead of being meandering, wandering pieces devoid of creativity that might come with the trappings of late 70s progressive rock, each song is a story unto itself, like the titular Ride the Lightning or the Egyptian pharaoh's tale turned band anthem Creeping Death. Metallica was clearly developing into something more than just a band that thinks, watch us go as fast as possible while writing crushing riffs and doing technical solos. But also, we will craft a story and show you that we can do that with lyrics and with the sonic power that the distortion of the metal genre provides. Yet again, we can see maturation in the band as they include their first proper quote-unquote ballad in the lengthy mid-track offering known as Fade to Black, that even when released in 1984 was taken as a strange and not fully warmly welcomed turn in the band's music. This turn would morph into something that would see the first semblances of cracks in the proverbial armor of what to this point had been a strictly metal band. Now, in my opinion, this is a good and clever subversion of the stereotype of a ballad structure, as it is written primarily in a sad and melancholic key that just continues to harangue you as the protracted and contemplative letter to suicide crescendos into a frenetic and pulse-pounding conclusion. So it is at this point that I feel the need to explain. This is where the turn happens in the first 5 journey. It is here that Metallica specifically, but any artist in general, will inevitably begin gaining more popularity, and along with it, more scrutiny. Metallica toured, and to their credit, still tours like maniacs, having completed 2,080 known tour dates at the time of this writing, on every continent and an immense amount of countries over a 40-year career. And for those of you who like doing fun, quick, and statistically absurd math, that's 1 gig a week, every week, without stopping, for 40 years straight. While marketing and touring and merchandise are helpful, in 1984 there were no videos to be had, no mainstream radio airplay, just aggressive tape trading, word of mouth of an incredible live show, and reputation for excellent power in those performances. But no matter the hurdles of the era, here is where the peak happens. This is the moment in any artist's catalog where the seminal classic or classics will be created and a pivot point will occur. In Metallica's case, their turn will come from tragedy, but every band will have something happen in this third outing that shifts perspective, alters their sound, and inevitably starts the downward, but not necessarily bad, slide to album number 5. The Peak. Less than 18 months later, and having played a couple songs from the forthcoming album already on the previous tour, 1986's incredible, and in my opinion, best album, Master of Puppets, arrives. As before, everything is improved. Lyrics, songwriting, composition, production, focus, drive, energy, song length, everything. The quote-unquote shortest song on the album is over 5 minutes in length, and that is the opening track, Battery. By this point, Metallica began establishing a pattern in their album creation. Start with a crushing and potent opener at slot 1. Follow up with a lengthy and story-driven song at slot 2. Song 3 is either deeply potent or crushing in its own way as a very heavy palate cleanser that leads to Song 4, which is either a ballad or the closest thing to it that Metallica will do at this time. In this case, it seems like they just took the best elements of the previous album and heightened them, seeming to ask, can we just repeat what we've done before, but better? With the penultimate track on the album, Orion, being what is, in my opinion, and countless others, Metallica's best composition. I find it no small irony that the track is an instrumental, as we are finally treated with an entire piece that was primarily composed by the band's, arguably, most musically gifted member, Cliff Burton. Now, for those of you who already know, Cliff would tragically pass away on September 26, 1986, while on tour for this album, and it would leave a permanent scar that will resound throughout the rest of this band's legacy to this day. Already heavy drinkers and focused on living a life on the road, Metallica would lean much harder into their next effort as a means to attempt to grieve and express the anguish and anger that would stem from this awful incident, to results in success that have yet to be equaled within the genre or by any of their peers before or since. The Change. And here we arrive at where the band in question changed forever. Now, while on the surface, it seems you'd have the same sort of touchstones from the previous albums and its predecessors, released a little shy of 2 years after the death of one of the most pivotal and driving members of the band, 1988's And Justice for All does have the surface touchstones as its three predecessors. Long songs, with the shortest being the finale clocking in at 5 minutes and 15 seconds. And the average song length being over 6 minutes, including the nearly 10-minute instrumental classic To Live Is to Die. Justice, the shorthand name of this album, coined by many different fans, is potent and powerful, with many anti-establishment and government anthems at its core. The band has now fully matured into something different. The songs are focused on power and piles of riffs. The intricacy of songwriting and storytelling not as intensely focused on as the potency of the length and repetition of what tend to be slower, more focused songs. Certainly, there is speed throughout, including the drummer, Lars Ulrich's fastest double bass drumming effort on the anti-parent anthem Dyer's Eve. Dear mother, what is this hell you have put me through? But generally, the songwriting has morphed into something akin to power first, as opposed to the previous album's composition or story-centric direction. So much so is the drive and potency and focus on power of this album that newcomer Jason Newsted's bass was turned down so as to be almost completely inaudible in the first released copies of this album. Naught but dueling guitars and pounding drums throughout this album to pummel the senses, to get you progressively angrier at the oppression of the government, or to your parents when you're in your most rebellious phases. And of course, the dark, grim reality of war. Yes, I'm looking at you, one.
What is democracy? What is democracy?
Got something to do with young men killing each other.
When it comes my turn, will you want me to go?
For democracy, any man would give his only begotten son.
Do you know what that song is about? A human being has had their arms, legs, and face blown off in World War I, and they were kept alive as a medical marvel, as this person somehow survived that horrific event, and their only existence is now, spoiler alert to a 50-year-old book and movie, is to continually tap "Kill Me" in Morse code on their pillow as they lay living out the rest of their life as what is essentially a nonverbal potato. Brutal. The New Age. With the newfound power and focus, and the poignancy of what crafted these ideas not lost to audiences around the world, Metallica would gather a larger and larger following as they relentlessly toured the globe, finally stopping their relentless onslaught of touring to begin what would be the culmination and the absolute pinnacle of what this and every band does at the conclusion of the first five. The time had come to attempt a new chapter. With all the knowledge Metallica had gained from non-stop touring and recording, they leaned fully into the idea that doing exactly what they want in order to represent who they are should become the loudest and clearest message that they should proclaim. And thus, the Black Album was born. A diamond-selling, that's 10 million copies sold to us mere mortals, effort that would forever launch Metallica into musical eternity. But at what cost? Gone are the long, meandering, powerful, and potent metal tracks, now replaced with a bevy of hard rock anthems. Certainly, there are moments of the old Metallica in there, with speedier tracks like Holier Than Thou and Through the Never. But they only comprise 7 total minutes of a 62-minute runtime. The rest are punchy, clearly written and sung hard rock songs. Now do not misunderstand. These are some of the punchiest, best written hard rock anthems of all time. But it is a far cry from 8-minute, 200 plus BPM epics about cocaine abuse. Instead, we speak of bad dreams, with Enter Sandman, being a generally bad person who can't be forgiven with The Unforgiven, and even going so far as to have their first genuine, slow ballad. You thought Fade to Black was bad? How about a 6.5-minute love song that has acoustic guitar and violins as the focus in it because nothing else matters, apparently? As you might imagine, Metallica were labeled sellouts, and just as their still new bassist said, yeah, we're sellouts, every arena, every night. And they were right. Metallica would tour off the back of the strength of this album for nearly 5 years before they sat down to write new material. And what would that bring? The conclusion.
Where do I take this pain of mine?
The same thing that I think any band that makes it this far comes to, which is one of 3 paths. Continue to change, try to repeat the same peak of success for the rest of your career, or try to recapture the glory of the old days. Now, to Metallica's credit and enduring legacy, they chose all 3 routes, but in different times. The next 2 efforts were essentially written in tandem, Load and Reload, and the band members cut their hair and continued to delve even further in the hard rock and rock genres, to staggering success and greater audiences, but less album sales, as their sales peak had definitely occurred with their previous effort. By the end of the decade, though continually popular, the band's now longest tenured bassist called it quits after being harangued for attempting a project outside of the band and being displeased with the musical directions the band was taking. This led lead singer and rhythm guitarist James Hetfield even further down a darkened path and eventually to the near destruction of the band, until sobriety, therapy, and a lot of focus led to the most bizarrely produced and sounding effort of perhaps any metal artist's of note's catalog, Saint Anger. And perhaps someday I'll talk at great length about that specific album. But for now, let it be known that Metallica really went full throttle into doing whatever they wanted. Production was out the window, touring's consistent, but now there's a new bassist, the mighty and incredibly talented Robert Trujillo. And the album was universally derided, and has become a bit of a meme in metal and musical culture. Yet Metallica continued to carry on, riding on the back of its previous catalog to this day. Sure, there have been 2 new albums in the last 14 years, but it feels like trying to capture old glory without the same sort of spirit. What can you do? These aren't angry 20-year-olds. These are 55-year-old multimillionaire parents whose only real true issue left to discuss is that someday they too will die. So what can we learn? Why did I feel the urgent need to talk about this and to build this narrative around the first 5 Metallica albums? Because I believe that this pattern of the first 5, beginning, climb, peak, change, and new age, holds true regardless of artist and genre. So long as you can make it to 5 albums, this too will happen to you. I see it happen time and time again, and I'm endlessly fascinated by what and why this happens. Join me next time as I discuss another member of the Big Four on The First 5.